September 1932. Warsaw. The air hung heavy with the damp chill of early autumn, and inside a cramped office on the third floor of the Polish General Staff building, a young mathematician named Marian Rejewski stared at a machine that would change the course of human history. Before him sat fragments, mechanical scraps, really, of what German engineers believed to be the perfect cipher. The Enigma machine. 3 rotors, a plug board, 26 letters that could be scrambled into 158 million possible combinations. To the men in Berlin who designed it, this was not merely a coding device. It was a fortress. Impenetrable, unbreakable. A mathematical god that would render enemy intelligence blind and German military communication invincible. They were wrong. But they would not discover this for years, not until their tanks had rolled across Europe, not until their U-boats prowled the Atlantic, and not until the very janitors they overlooked had become the unlikely architects of their undoing. The story of Enigma is not simply a tale of code breakers hunched over encrypted messages in shadowy rooms. It is a story of hubris, of a regime so convinced of its own superiority that it failed to see the brilliance in those it considered beneath notice. It is a story of a cleaning man who understood that evil thrives in secrecy, and that the smallest act of defiance can topple empires. And it is a story that begins not with the war itself, but with the quiet, methodical work of forgotten men and women who understood that freedom is never won by armies alone, but by those willing to risk everything for a single, stolen blueprint. In the years following the First World War, Germany sought to rebuild not just its military, but its sense of invulnerability. The Enigma machine, originally a commercial device designed for banks and businesses, was adopted by the German military in the late 1920s and refined into a tool they believed would grant them total strategic dominance. By 1930, the Wehrmacht, the Kriegsmarine, and eventually the Luftwaffe had all adopted variations of the machine. Messages could be transmitted over radio waves without fear. Even if intercepted, the cipher appeared unreadable, a jumble of letters that shifted with every keystroke, every rotation of the machine's rotors, every configuration of its plug board. To decrypt a single message without the key settings was, as mathematically, an impossibility, or so they thought. The Poles did not share this certainty. In the shadow of a resurgent and hostile Germany, Poland's military intelligence, the Bureau Cipher, understood that survival depended on knowing what Berlin was planning. And so, in a quiet act of desperation and genius, they assembled a team of young mathematicians from the University of Poznan. These were not soldiers. They were students of pure mathematics, men trained in logic, patterns, and abstract reasoning. Among them was Marian Rejewski, a thin, bespectacled man of 27 who would prove that brilliance does not require uniforms or rank, but even brilliance requires material to work with. And that material came not from a daring raid or a high-level defector, but from a man whose name remains, to this day, and one of history's quiet mysteries. A man who cleaned floors, a man who emptied trash bins, a man the Germans never bothered to notice. History does not preserve his name with certainty, though some records suggest he was a German technician, perhaps a low-level maintenance worker or cleaning staff, inside a facility where Enigma machines were manufactured or serviced. What we know is this. In the early 1930s, someone with access to the inner workings of the Enigma machine made a choice. Not a grand, cinematic choice announced with speeches or fanfare, but a small, dangerous one. He observed, he memorized, he sketched. And when the opportunity came, he smuggled out documents, technical diagrams, wiring schematics, the internal logic of the machine's rotors and plug board. These papers found their way to French intelligence, which in turn shared them with the Poles. It was not a complete machine. It was not even a complete blueprint. But it was enough. Enough for Rejewski to reverse engineer the Enigma's internal wiring. Enough to understand how the rotors turned, how the electrical pathways shifted, how the cipher transformed plaintext into chaos. And with that understanding, he built the first mathematical models to break it. The Germans never suspected. To them, the janitor, if they thought of him at all, was invisible, a part of the background, a man who swept floors and carried out bins and posed no threat. In their eyes, only men of rank and intellect mattered. Only engineers, officers, and leaders could alter the course of history. They did not believe that a man with a mop could hold the keys to their secrets. And in that blindness, they planted the seeds of their own defeat. By 1938, as Hitler's armies prepared to swallow Austria and Czechoslovakia, Polish cryptanalysts had been reading German Enigma traffic for years. They had built electromechanical machines called bommy, precursors to the British bomb, that could test thousands of rotor configurations per hour. They had cracked not just one version of Enigma, but multiple variants, and they had done it in silence, understanding that the greatest weapon in code breaking is not the breaking itself, but the enemy's ignorance that you have done so. But Poland was running out of time. In July 1939, with German invasion imminent, Polish intelligence made a desperate decision. In a secret meeting in the Kabati woods outside Warsaw, they handed over everything, machines, methods, to blueprints, to British and French representatives. Among those present was a young British mathematician named Alan Turing, who would soon lead the effort at Bletchley Park to expand and refine the Polish breakthroughs. The Poles had cracked Enigma. The British would industrialize that cracking, building hundreds of bomb machines, recruiting thousands of code breakers, and ultimately reading tens of thousands of German messages every month. But none of it would have been possible without that first fragile thread, the smuggled schematics from a man whose name we may never know. A janitor who understood that empires are built on secrets and that secrets, once revealed, lose their power. The Germans never learned. Even as the war progressed, even as U-boats were mysteriously hunted down mid-Atlantic, and even as Rommel's supply convoys in North Africa were bombed with uncanny precision, the German High Command refused to believe that Enigma had been compromised. They added rotors. They changed procedures. They doubled their security protocols. But they never questioned the machine itself. To do so would have been to admit that their perfect system was flawed, that their superiority was an illusion, that a cleaning man with a pencil and paper had outwitted their finest engineers. The contrast is striking. The Nazis built their ideology on a foundation of racial and intellectual supremacy. They believed that order, discipline, and Aryan genius would render them unstoppable. Yet they were undone by the very people they dismissed: Poles, Jews, women, clerks, janitors. At Bletchley Park, nearly 75% of the code-breaking workforce were women, many of them young and from working-class backgrounds. They operated the bomb machines, cross-referenced decrypts, and pieced together intelligence that saved countless lives. They were not celebrated. They were sworn to secrecy. Many carried their stories to the grave, but they were essential. This is the hidden arithmetic of freedom. It does not belong to the loudest voice or the highest rank. It belongs to the overlooked, the underestimated, the invisible. It belongs to the man who sweeps the floor and sees what others ignore. It belongs to the woman who operates a machine and notices a pattern no officer would perceive. It belongs to the mathematician who solves problems not for glory, but because the world depends on it. By the time the war ended, Enigma decrypts, codenamed Ultra by the Allies, had influenced nearly every major campaign. The Battle of the Atlantic, where German U-boats were systematically outmaneuvered. The North African campaign, where Rommel's plans were read before his own officers received them. The D-Day invasion, where German reinforcements were deceived and delayed. Historians estimate that ultra-intelligence shortened the war in Europe by at least 2 years and saved millions of lives. Winston Churchill called it the secret weapon that won the war. Dwight Eisenhower said it was decisive, and yet for decades, no one knew. The British kept ultra-classified until the 1970s. Marian Rejewski lived quietly in Poland, his achievements unrecognized until late in his life. The janitor, whoever he was, vanished into history, his contribution unmarked by monuments or medals. The women of Bletchley were told to forget what they had done and did so in silence for 30 years. This is the paradox of secret wars. Those who win them cannot claim victory, those who fight them cannot be celebrated, and those who sacrifice the most often remain nameless. There is a symbolic weight to the image of a janitor smuggling out blueprints. It is the inverse of the Nazi mythos, the idea that power flows from strength, purity, and dominance. Instead, power flowed from humility, courage, and the willingness to act when no one was watching. The Germans built Enigma to be a fortress, but fortresses have foundations, and foundations can be undermined by those who know where to dig. In a way, the story of Enigma is the story of the war itself, and the Axis powers believed in inevitability, that their technological and ideological superiority made victory certain. The Allies, by contrast, believed in resilience, that ordinary people, given the tools and the will, could overcome any tyranny. The Nazis built a machine to hide their secrets. The Allies built a coalition to reveal them. And in the end, transparency defeated encryption. Collaboration defeated isolation. Democracy defeated fascism. Today, the Enigma machine sits in museums, a relic of a war long past. Tourists photograph it. Students study it. But few understand the full weight of what it represents. It is not just a machine. It is a reminder that the tools of oppression can be turned against their creators, that the overlooked can become the indispensable, that a single, courageous act, smuggling a blueprint, solving an equation, operating a machine, can ripple across history and save millions of lives. And it is a reminder that freedom is not defended by heroes alone. It is defended by janitors and mathematicians and clerks, by people who do not seek recognition but act because it is right, by those who understand that secrecy is the weapon of tyrants and that the greatest act of defiance is to bring the truth into the light. The Nazis believed their Enigma code was unbreakable. They were wrong. Not because their engineers failed, but because they underestimated the ingenuity of those they considered inferior. They believed that power came from control, but power, true power, comes from people, ordinary, overlooked, invisible people, who refuse to accept the world as it is and dare to change it. In the end, and the janitor did not defeat the Nazis. The Codebreakers did not defeat the Nazis. The soldiers did not defeat the Nazis. They all did, together, in silence, with scraps of paper and fragments of machines and the unshakable belief that evil, no matter how sophisticated, can be undone. That is the lesson of Enigma. That is the lesson of the war, and that is the lesson we must never forget